For 10 years, the land beneath the walls of Troy bore witness to an unrelenting war. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and smoke, the cries of warriors echoing across the plains. On one side, the mighty Achaean army, led by Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, who sought vengeance for the abduction of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. On the other side, the proud city of Troy, its towering walls and brave defenders standing as the last line between destruction and survival. There was Paris, the prince of Troy, whose love for Helen set this conflict ablaze. There was Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, who fought valiantly to protect his people, even as fate loomed over him. And there was Achilles, the invincible, Greek hero whose wrath shaped the course of battles, but whose own tragic destiny cast a shadow over his victories. For a decade, the gods themselves watched with divided loyalties, some aiding the Greeks, others protecting Troy. Zeus, the king of the gods, remained an unyielding observer, his gaze fixed on the mortals who waged this endless war. Apollo, angered by the Greeks, sent plagues upon their army, while Athena and Hera schemed to ensure Troy's downfall. The world trembled under the weight of their meddling. But even the greatest warriors, even the mightiest armies, found themselves caught in a stalemate. Neither side could claim the upper hand. The Achaean ships still lined the shores of the Aegean, but their hopes of breaching Troy's defenses faded with each passing year. The Trojans, for all their courage and resolve, were confined behind their impenetrable walls, their lives hanging by a thread. And then came the silence. The plains outside Troy, once alive with the clash of swords and the roar of battle, were eerily still. The Greek encampments were empty, their fires extinguished. The ships that had brought the Achaeans across the sea seemed to have vanished into the horizon. But they left behind something strange, something unexpected. A wooden horse, massive and imposing, stood alone on the battlefield, its surface polished to perfection, its size dwarfing anything the Trojans had ever seen. It was unlike any weapon of war they had encountered. A gift, it seemed, a surrender, or perhaps something else entirely. The Trojans gathered at the gates of their city, staring at the enigmatic structure. It towered above them, casting long shadows in the dim light of dusk. Whispers spread like wildfire among the people. What was it? Why had the Greeks abandoned the war after so many years? Could this truly be a gesture of peace, or was it a trap? Their questions would soon be answered, but not in the way they hoped. For those who lived through the Trojan War, this moment would become legend. But to understand the weight of this moment, we must go back to the beginning, back to the spark that ignited this decade-long conflict. It began not with a battle, but with a promise made by Paris, prince of Troy, to the goddess Aphrodite. Aphrodite had offered him Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, as a reward for choosing her as the fairest of the goddesses. Paris, blinded by desire and ambition, sailed to Sparta and took Helen with him. This act of betrayal enraged the Greeks, uniting their kings and warriors under one banner, with Agamemnon as their leader. The war that followed was one of pride and vengeance. Achilles, the greatest warrior of his time, sought glory on the battlefield. Hector, Troy's noble defender, fought to protect his homeland from destruction. And amidst it all, Helen became the symbol of both beauty and destruction, her presence both a curse and a prize. For years, the battles raged. The gods played their games, favoring one side or the other, while mortals suffered their whims. Thousands died, but neither side could claim victory. Troy's walls held firm, a testament to the skill of its builders and the determination of its people. And yet, the Greeks remained, their ships anchored on the shores, their warriors refusing to abandon their cause. This is the story of how it all ended. Not with swords, not with shields, but with an idea. A single idea that would forever change the course of history. A deception so profound that it has echoed through the ages. Now, I ask you, if you were a Trojan standing at the gates that day, staring at the wooden horse, what would you have done? Would you have trusted it as a gift of peace? Or would you have questioned the silence of your enemy? Let us continue. This journey into the heart of one of the greatest tricks ever conceived. Let us uncover the truth behind the Trojan Horse and the fall of Troy. It all began with a single act of vanity, one that would unravel the lives of thousands and bring an entire city to its knees. High upon Mount Olympus, amidst the gods and goddesses who ruled over mortals, a golden apple appeared. Inscribed upon it were the words, "To the fairest." And thus, a contest began, one that would shape the fate of men and gods alike. 3 goddesses claimed the apple. Hera, queen of the gods, promised power and dominion over the world. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, offered victory in battle and unmatched knowledge. And then there was Aphrodite, goddess of love, who made a simple yet irresistible pledge. "I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman on earth." The choice was not Zeus's to make, for even the king of the gods did not wish to invite the wrath of those 3. Instead, the decision fell to Paris, a young prince of Troy. Living as a humble shepherd at the time, Paris had no idea that this moment would seal the doom of his homeland. He chose Aphrodite. He chose love. And with that choice, the path to war was laid. Aphrodite kept her promise. She led Paris to Helen of Sparta, the wife of Menelaus. Helen's beauty was said to rival that of the gods themselves. Paris, blinded by desire and emboldened by Aphrodite's favor, abducted her and took her to Troy. It was an act of defiance, one that Menelaus could not forgive. The Greeks rallied under Menelaus and his brother, Agamemnon. Kings and warriors from across the land answered their call. Odysseus of Ithaca, cunning and clever. Achilles, unmatched in battle, whose very name struck fear into his enemies. And many others, united by a shared purpose, to bring Helen back and make Troy pay for its transgression. With a fleet of 1,000 ships, they sailed across the Aegean, their eyes set on Troy's towering walls. The Trojan War had begun. For 10 years, the war raged on, each side refusing to yield. The Greeks fought with unrelenting ferocity, but Troy's defenses, built by the gods themselves, stood firm. Inside those walls, King Priam and his sons, Hector and Paris, led their people with courage and resolve. Outside, the Greeks suffered under the unforgiving sun, their hopes dimming with each passing year. Heroes rose and fell. Achilles, the greatest warrior of his time, became a force of nature on the battlefield, cutting down Trojan warriors with ease. But his rage consumed him, and when Hector, the pride of Troy, killed Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, it set the stage for a tragic confrontation. In a duel that would be remembered for centuries, Achilles faced Hector outside the gates of Troy. The prince fought valiantly, but the gods had already chosen his fate. Achilles struck him down, and in an act of defiance, he dragged Hector's body behind his chariot for all of Troy to see. It was a moment of grief and fury, one that deepened the hatred between the 2 sides. But even Achilles was not invincible. Paris, guided by the gods, loosed an arrow that struck Achilles in his only vulnerable spot, his heel. The death of Achilles shook the Greek army to its core, leaving them leaderless and desperate. It seemed as though the war would never end. Both sides suffered immeasurable losses. Thousands of lives were claimed by the sword, disease, and the unyielding passage of time. And yet, the Greeks remained, their resolve fueled by vengeance and pride. The Trojans, weary but determined, continued to hold their ground, their city a beacon of resilience. But wars are not always won with swords and shields. Sometimes, the greatest victories are born from the sharpest minds. Among the Greek leaders was a man unlike the others, a man who relied not on strength but on strategy. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, had a reputation for his cunning and resourcefulness. It was said he could outwit even the gods themselves. As the Greeks stood on the brink of defeat, it was Odysseus who devised a plan so audacious, so unexpected, that it would change the course of history. He proposed not another battle, but a deception, a single idea that would bring an end to the decade-long stalemate. Odysseus's plan was simple in its brilliance. The Greeks would feign surrender, leaving behind a gift, a wooden horse, massive and hollow, large enough to hide their warriors within. The Trojans, weary of war and desperate for peace, would bring the horse into their city, believing it to be a tribute to the gods. But inside that horse, the Greeks would wait, and when night fell, they would strike. It was a gamble, one that required not just skill but patience and precision. The Greek leaders agreed, for they had no other choice. Victory seemed impossible, and the war had taken its toll. It was time for a different kind of battle, a battle of wits, not weapons. On the plains of Troy, under the watchful eyes of gods and men, the Trojan horse was born. It would become a symbol of cunning, betrayal, and the thin line between victory and devastation. The Trojans had no idea what awaited them. The Greeks had no guarantees their plan would succeed, and the world would never be the same again. It was a sight no Trojan had expected to see. One morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the city walls, the people of Troy gazed out upon the battlefield that had been their prison for 10 long years. The Greek camps, once bustling with life, were now deserted. The fires that had burned through countless nights were cold. Their enemies, the Achaean army, had vanished. The ships that had lined the shores were gone, leaving behind only the faintest imprint of their presence on the sand. For a moment, the Trojans dared to hope. Could it be true? Could the Greeks have abandoned their siege and sailed home? The tension that had gripped the city for so long began to lift, but their relief was tempered by confusion. For on the plain where battles had been fought, there now stood something strange, something massive. It was a horse, a colossal structure of wood, intricately carved and towering above the remnants of the battlefield. Its surface gleamed. In the morning light, the craftsmanship so precise that it seemed almost divine. The horse stood as a lone sentinel, silent and imposing, its hollow eyes gazing toward the gates of Troy. The Greeks had left no explanation, no message, no warning, only this offering. And so, the questions began. Why had they left it? What purpose did it serve? To the Trojans, it seemed a gesture of surrender, perhaps an offering to the gods, an apology for their failure to conquer Troy. But inside that wooden shell, hidden within the darkness, Greek warriors waited, holding their breath. The choice of a horse was no accident. To the Trojans, it was more than just a symbol. It was a sacred connection to Poseidon, the god of the sea, who was also revered as the creator of horses. For centuries, horses had been associated with power, nobility, and the divine. The Greeks understood this. They knew that the Trojans, steeped in tradition and reverence for the gods, would see the horse not as a threat, but as a sign of peace, a gift worthy of their victory. Yet, the horse was more than a symbol, it was a strategy. Its hollow interior was carefully constructed to conceal a select group of Greek warriors, chosen for their bravery and skill. These men, led by Odysseus himself, were tasked with carrying out the final phase of the plan, to hide within the horse, to wait until the moment was right, and then to strike from within the heart of Troy. To the Trojans, the horse seemed harmless. To the Greeks, it was a weapon that required no blade, no shield, no bow. It required only patience and trust, two things the Trojans would unknowingly provide. But the Greeks were not alone in their cunning. The gods, as they had done since the beginning of the war, played their part. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, had guided Odysseus's hand in conceiving the plan. It was she who inspired the creation of the horse, who whispered ideas into the minds of men. For Athena, this was not merely a victory for the Greeks. It was a victory over Troy, a city that had defied her favor. The gods, however, were not united in their allegiance. Poseidon, whose seas had carried the Greeks to Troy, remained silent, his feelings toward the horse unknown. Apollo, protector of Troy, watched in anger as his city fell victim to deceit. And Zeus, ever the impartial observer, allowed the events to unfold, his judgment reserved for the aftermath. Even as the Greeks prepared to leave, the gods sent omens, signs that the Trojans ignored at their peril. A serpent devouring a bird's nest, a fire in the night sky. And yet, The horse remained standing, its secrets untouched, its presence unquestioned. The gods had set the stage, but it was the mortals who would play their parts. Was it human cunning that sealed Troy's fate? Or was it divine intervention, the will of the gods, that guided the Greeks to victory? Could the Trojans have resisted their fate, or were they simply pawns in a game played by higher powers? This is the story of the Trojan Horse, a deception so profound that it remains one of the most enduring tales of strategy and betrayal. And yet, the story is far from over. For as the Trojans celebrated their supposed victory, darkness began to fall, and within the horse, the Greeks prepared to unleash their final attack. The wooden horse loomed outside the gates of Troy, a silent monolith casting long shadows in the golden light of dusk. The city's people had gathered to witness this strange relic of war, their faces filled with curiosity, hope, and unease. For some, it was a gift, a trophy of their endurance, after 10 grueling years of conflict. For others, it was a riddle, a strange and unsettling artifact left behind by a cunning enemy. The Council of Troy convened near the gates, where voices rose in heated debate. King Priam, his age showing in the lines etched across his face, sought wisdom from his advisors and priests. "This war has tested our strength beyond measure," he said. "But perhaps it is finally over. Perhaps the gods have rewarded our resilience." His words carried the weight of a leader desperate for peace, a man who had seen too much bloodshed. Among those gathered was Laocoon, a Trojan priest, whose skepticism cut through the air like a blade. "Do not be deceived by the Greeks," he warned, his voice stern and unwavering. "We cannot trust their motives nor their gifts. This horse is no offering to the gods. It is a trap." His words struck a chord with many, but fear and doubt were quick to counter his reason. Others, like Paris, spoke in favor of bringing the horse into the city. "The Greeks are gone," Paris argued. "This is a symbol of our triumph. Let it stand as a monument to our victory, a reminder to all who would dare challenge Troy." His confidence was infectious, fueled by the favor of Aphrodite, yet his past actions had already brought ruin to his people. As the debate raged on, the people of Troy stood divided. Some echoed Laocoon's caution, urging the destruction of the horse. Others saw it as a divine blessing, a sign of their invincibility. And then, the gods intervened. Laocoon, still adamant in his warnings, approached the horse with his 2 young sons. Holding his staff aloft, he called upon the gods to reveal the truth. "If I am wrong, strike me down," he declared, his voice echoing across the plain. "But if I am right, grant me a sign, so my people will not fall prey to this deceit." And then, the sea began to stir. From the distant horizon, 2 massive serpents emerged, their bodies coiling and writhing as they surged toward the shore. The people of Troy watched in terror as the creatures slithered through the waves, their scales glistening in the dying light of the sun. The serpents reached the shore and made their way toward Laocoon, their movements swift and deliberate. Laocoon stood firm, shielding his sons as the serpents coiled around him. Their massive bodies constricted with relentless force, crushing him and his children as the crowd looked on in horror. The priest's cries were muffled as the serpents dragged him into the sea, their task complete. To the Trojans, this was no ordinary event. It was a sign, a clear message from the gods. Laocoon's defiance had been punished. The horse was not to be destroyed. It was sacred, a gift meant to honor Troy's victory. And so, the voices of caution were silenced, replaced by a growing belief that the horse must be brought into the city. With great effort, the Trojans pulled the massive horse through the city gates. Ropes strained, wheels groaned, and the people cheered as the symbol of their supposed victory entered the heart of their city. The gates, which had stood as their shield against the Greeks for a decade, closed behind them with a heavy thud. The horse was placed in the central square, where it towered above the people. Its polished surface caught the light of the setting sun, and its presence seemed almost alive. The Trojans gathered around it, their faces alight with joy and relief. The war was over, or so they believed. As night fell, the city came alive with celebration. Fires were lit, and the scent of roasted meats filled the air. Wine flowed freely as men and women danced in the streets. their laughter echoing through the alleys and squares. Musicians played lively tunes, their melodies a stark contrast to the somber notes of war that had once defined their lives. King Priam, seated on his throne, looked upon his people with a rare smile. His heart, burdened for so many years, felt lighter. Tonight, he declared, we celebrate not just the end of the war, but the resilience and unity of Troy. This horse will stand as a monument to our strength, a reminder of the gods' favor. Yet, amidst the revelry, a foreboding presence lingered. The horse, silent and unmoving, cast long shadows in the flickering firelight. Inside its hollow structure, Greek warriors waited, their breath shallow, their weapons ready. They could hear the celebrations outside, the laughter and music that filled the night. And they waited, knowing that the time would soon come to act. The Trojans, in their joy, could not see the storm that was about to descend upon them. They had spent years fighting a war they believed was won with swords and shields, never imagining that it would end with a single act of deception. As they celebrated their triumph, their enemies lay hidden, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This night, which began with joy and relief, would soon become one of fire and blood. The fate of Troy, sealed by the pull of ropes and the turn of wheels, rested in the belly of the wooden horse. And as the city slept, the Greeks prepared to unleash their final blow. The night fell heavy upon Troy, cloaking the city in a serene stillness that had not been felt in years. The streets, once filled with the sounds of war and vigilance, now echoed with laughter and songs from the celebration. For the Trojans, it was a night of relief, a night of joy. But for the Greeks, it was the night they had waited for, a night of vengeance. Inside the hollow belly of the wooden horse, cramped and suffocating in the darkness, the Greek warriors waited. Odysseus, their leader, whispered final instructions to his men, his voice calm but resolute. Each soldier gripped their weapon tightly, their hearts pounding as they prepared for what lay ahead. The silence outside was their signal. The city had fallen asleep. With painstaking care, the hatch on the side of the horse was pushed open. A single soldier emerged, his movements slow and deliberate as he surveyed the quiet square. Behind him, one by one, the warriors climbed out, their armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. They moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the stone streets as they spread out across the city. At the gates of Troy, more Greeks waited in the darkness of the shoreline, having returned under the cover of night. The men inside, the horse made their way to the massive wooden gates, cutting down the guards who had been posted there. The gates creaked open, and the waiting army poured into the city like a flood unleashed. Troy's fate was sealed. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. The Greeks moved through the sleeping city with ruthless precision, setting fire to homes and temples, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. The flames spread quickly, engulfing the streets in a hellish glow. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying with it the cries of the doomed. Families were torn apart in the chaos. Mothers clutched their children, running through the burning streets in search of safety that did not exist. Warriors scrambled to defend their city, only to be cut down by the advancing Greek forces. The sound of swords clashing, of screams and shouts, filled the air, drowning out the songs and laughter that had echoed through the streets just hours earlier. The palace of King Priam was not spared. The aged king, who had watched his city stand strong for a decade, now faced its destruction. As the Greeks stormed the palace, Priam sought refuge at the altar of Zeus, hoping for divine intervention. But the gods, who had watched the war unfold, did nothing to save him. Priam was struck down, his blood staining the very altar he had prayed to for salvation. Even those who had been spared the sword faced their own horrors. Women were taken as spoils of war, their cries for mercy ignored. Helen, whose beauty had been the catalyst for this war, was found by Menelaus. Her fate, too, hung in the balance, though she was spared. Her life a reminder of the cost of desire and betrayal. By dawn, Troy was unrecognizable. The once proud city, with its towering walls and vibrant streets, was reduced to ashes. Smoke rose from the ruins, darkening the sky as the Greeks looted what little remained. The streets were littered with the bodies of the fallen, the air heavy with the stench of fire and death. The survivors, those who had managed to escape the sword, wandered through the ruins in shock. Mothers searched desperately for their children, their cries piercing the heavy silence. Warriors who had fought to their last breath lay motionless, their weapons clutched in lifeless hands. And the flames continued to burn, consuming what little hope remained. The destruction of Troy was not just the fall of a city, it was the end of an era. It was a reminder of the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations, of how quickly pride and power could be undone by deception and greed. And yet, the story of the Trojan Horse raises questions that transcend time. Was this a tale of brilliance or cruelty? Did the Greeks' cunning justify the destruction they unleashed? Or was it an act of dishonor, a betrayal that tarnished their victory? History is full of such moral dilemmas. Deception has won wars, toppled empires, and reshaped the world. But at what cost? And can such victories ever truly be called triumphs? As you hear this tale, ask yourself, what would you have done? In their place? Would you have celebrated the cunning of Odysseus, or mourned the fall of a proud and noble city? Troy, once the jewel of the ancient world, was no more. Its people scattered, its walls reduced to rubble, its story immortalized not in triumph, but in tragedy. The Trojan horse, the symbol of its fall, became a lesson, a warning passed down through generations. And even now, it stands as a testament to the power of strategy and the devastating consequences of trust betrayed. This is the story of Troy's final night, a moment when hope turned to despair, when the flames of war consumed not just a city, but the hearts and souls of its people. It is a story that has endured for millennia, its lessons as relevant today as they were on that fateful night. When the fires of Troy finally died down, only ashes and echoes remained. The city that had withstood a decade-long siege was no more. But what of the figures who shaped its story? What became of those whose names are now etched into the fabric of myth? King Priam, the ruler of Troy, met his end at the hands of Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. His death marked the fall of Troy's leadership and the final act of defiance from a city that had lost everything. Priam's sons, including Paris, were either slain in battle or hunted down in the chaos. Paris's actions, which had ignited the war, ultimately led to his city's ruin, and his name became synonymous with the dangers of reckless desire. Helen, the woman whose beauty was said to rival that of the gods, was found by her husband, Menelaus, among the ruins. His sword was raised to strike her down, but as the stories go, her beauty softened his anger. Some say she pleaded for her life, reminding him of the love they once shared. Others believe Aphrodite clouded his judgment. Regardless, Helen was spared and returned to Sparta with Menelaus. Yet, her story did not end in peace. For the rest of her life, Helen carried the weight of her role in the war, her name forever tied to the destruction of Troy. And then, there was Odysseus, the man whose cunning had brought about Troy's downfall. While his plan succeeded, it came at a cost. As the Greeks sailed home, the wrath of the gods followed them. Odysseus, in particular, would face a journey like no other. For 10 years, he wandered the seas, battling storms, monsters, and divine vengeance. His Odyssey would become one of the most famous tales in Greek mythology, a story of resilience, wit, and the enduring human spirit. Other Greek leaders faced similar fates. Agamemnon, triumphant in Troy, returned home only to be betrayed and murdered by his own wife, Clytemnestra. The legacy of the Trojan War reached far beyond the city's walls, touching the lives of everyone involved and shaping the myths and legends that would follow. The Trojan horse itself became more than just a tool of war. It became a symbol, a legend, and a warning. Across the centuries, its story was retold in art, literature, and culture, a testament to the power of cunning and the fragility of trust. From the epic poetry of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey to the plays of Euripides and Virgil's Aeneid, the Trojan horse was immortalized as a moment of brilliance and betrayal. Artists depicted its image in sculptures, paintings, and tapestries, each retelling capturing the drama and tragedy of that fateful night. Even today, the term Trojan horse is used to describe acts of deception and infiltration. In literature, the horse has inspired countless retellings and reinterpretations, from ancient myths to modern novels. In politics, it serves as a metaphor for hidden agendas and betrayal. And in technology, it has taken on a new meaning: computer. Viruses that infiltrate systems under the guise of harmless programs are called Trojan horses, their name a direct reference to the cunning Greek stratagem. The story of the Trojan horse is not just a tale of the past. Its lessons echo through history and into the modern world. Deception, infiltration, and trust betrayed are as relevant today as they were in ancient Troy. Consider the cyber attacks of the modern era, where hackers use Trojan viruses to infiltrate systems and wreak havoc. The parallels are striking: an innocent-looking program, much like the wooden horse, concealing a threat that can bring entire networks to their knees. In politics and warfare, the concept of the Trojan horse has been used time and again. From espionage to propaganda, the idea of hiding danger within the guise of peace or friendship has shaped strategies and outcomes. The lesson is clear: not all gifts are what they seem, and sometimes the greatest threats come not from open conflict, but from the trust we place in others. But this story is not just about grand historical events. It's about human nature, about the choices we make, the risks we take, and the trust we place in others. How often have we been deceived by something that seemed too good to be true? How many times have we ignored warnings, only to face the consequences later? So I ask you, where else in history, or even in your own life, has something too good to be true turned out to be a trap? What can we learn from the Trojans' fate? Is this story one of brilliance or cruelty, of strategy or dishonor? And how do we reconcile the line between victory and betrayal? The Trojan horse is more than just a relic of mythology. It is a timeless reminder of the power of deception and the dangers of unchecked trust. It is a story that forces us to question our own instincts, our own choices, and our own vulnerabilities. As we look back on the fall of Troy, we see not just a city destroyed, but a lesson etched into the fabric of history. The Trojan horse reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one we invite into our own gates. As the smoke cleared and the ashes settled, the fall of Troy became one of the most enduring stories of betrayal, strategy, and the power of the human mind. It was a tale not only of war, but of hubris, of how pride, trust, and blind belief can lead even the mightiest to ruin. The Trojan horse was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of the thin line between victory and devastation. This story reminds us of the cunning of Odysseus, the resilience of the Trojans, and the influence of the gods who played their own games, watching as mortals struggled with the weight of their decisions. It teaches us about human ambition and the cost of both trust and betrayal. Troy did not fall by brute force or superior numbers. It fell because of a single, clever idea that exploited human nature itself. Through this tale, we see how strategy can triumph over strength, how deception can reshape the course of history, and how the choices of a few can echo across generations. The fall of Troy is more than a cautionary tale. It is a mirror reflecting our own strengths and flaws, our own victories and tragedies. And now, I turn to you, the listeners of this timeless tale. What do you think? Was the Trojan horse a stroke of genius or an act of cruelty? Do you see this story as a celebration of strategy or a caution against trust? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What's your favorite story from the Trojan War? Is it the heroics of Hector, the wrath of Achilles, or the cunning of Odysseus? Share your insights. I'd love to hear them. If you've enjoyed this journey into the depths of mythology, don't forget to hit that like button. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows us to explore the incredible worlds of gods, heroes, and mortals together. Subscribe to the channel for more epic tales from mythology, and be sure to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. But this is not where the story ends. The fall of Troy was only the beginning. For while the Greeks celebrated their victory, their journey home was far from certain. Odysseus, the mastermind behind the Trojan horse, would face challenges beyond imagination, storms that tore apart his fleet, monsters that tested his courage, and gods whose wrath threatened his survival. His Odyssey, filled with danger, loss, and perseverance, would become one of the greatest adventures in mythology. Next time, we'll uncover the perilous journey of Odysseus, the man who tricked the Trojans and paid the price for his cunning. What trials did he face? How did he endure the wrath of Poseidon? And what lessons can we learn from his incredible story? Join us as we dive into the tale of the Odyssey, an epic of resilience, wit, and the enduring human spirit. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of one of the greatest tricks in mythology. The story of the Trojan Horse has captivated imaginations for millennia, and its lessons continue to resonate. As we reflect on the fall of Troy, let us remember that even the mightiest can be undone by a single clever idea, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in understanding the hearts and minds of others. Until next time, keep the fire of curiosity alive, and let the stories of the past inspire the path ahead.